Hello everyone, and welcome to the Middle Ages channel. Today we're embarking on an epic journey back in time, tracing the footsteps of knights, pilgrims, and kings along what we call the Crusaders' path. This isn't just one road, but a network of routes that crisscrossed Europe and the Middle East, forever changing the course of history. So, what exactly were the Crusades? At their core, they were a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes directed by the Latin Church in the medieval period. The most famous of these were the campaigns in the Holy Land, aimed at recovering Jerusalem and surrounding areas from Islamic rule. But the term also applies to other church-sanctioned campaigns. Our story begins in 1095 at the Council of Clermont in France. Imagine a massive crowd of clergy and common folk, gathered to hear a powerful speech from Pope Urban II. He called upon Western Christians to aid their Byzantine brethren in the East and to liberate Jerusalem. His words were like a spark in a tinderbox. Cries of Deus vult, meaning God wills it, echoed through the crowd. This was the moment the First Crusade was born. But who answered this call? It wasn't just battle-hardened knights in shining armor. The response was overwhelming and came from all walks of life. You had powerful nobles like Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of Toulouse, who led massive armies. But you also had thousands of ordinary people, peasants and town dwellers, who formed what's known as the People's Crusade. Fired up by fervent preachers like Peter the Hermit, they set off for the Holy Land, often ill-equipped and unprepared for the brutal journey ahead. The path was long and perilous. From various starting points in France, Germany, and Italy, these crusaders would converge and march overland through the Balkans, toward the great city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This journey alone was a monumental undertaking, covering thousands of miles on foot or horseback. They faced starvation, disease, and hostile locals along the way. For many, the journey was as deadly as any battle they would later face. Once they reached Constantinople, the Crusaders entered a world vastly different from their own. It was a city of incredible wealth, sophistication, and political intrigue. The Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I, had asked for Western mercenaries, but he got a massive, unpredictable force at his doorstep. He was wary, and relations between the Latins from the West and the Greeks of Byzantium were often tense. The emperor made the Crusader leaders swear an oath to return any former Byzantine lands they captured. This would become a major point of conflict later on. After crossing the Bosphorus Strait into Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, the real military campaign began. The first major challenge was the city of Nicaea, the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome. In 1097, after a difficult siege, the city surrendered, but to the Byzantines, not the Crusaders. This caused a lot of resentment among the Crusader ranks, who felt cheated out of their rightful spoils of war. The march south from Nicaea was even more grueling. The Crusaders slogged through the scorching Anatolian summer. At the Battle of Dorylaeum, they were nearly defeated by a surprise attack from the swift, skilled Turkish horse archers. Only the timely arrival of a second Crusader contingent saved them from annihilation. It was a hard-won victory that taught them a valuable lesson about the nature of warfare in the East. One of the most significant and brutal episodes of the First Crusade was the Siege of Antioch. This ancient, heavily fortified city stood as a major obstacle on the road to Jerusalem. The siege lasted for nearly 8 agonizing months, from October 1097 to June 1098. The Crusaders outside the walls suffered terribly from famine and disease, while the defenders held strong. The city was finally taken, not by force, but by treachery. A Crusader leader, Bohemond of Taranto, convinced a tower guard to betray the city. The Crusaders poured in, and a horrific massacre followed, but their relief was short-lived. Just days later, a massive Muslim relief army arrived and besieged the Crusaders inside the city they had just captured. Trapped and starving, their situation seemed hopeless. It was then that a monk named Peter Bartholomew claimed to have discovered the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. Whether a miracle or a morale-boosting fabrication, it galvanized the Crusaders. They charged out of the city and, against all odds, routed the larger Muslim army. After the victory at Antioch, the path to Jerusalem was finally open. But the Crusader army was a shadow of its former self, depleted by battle, disease, and desertion. They finally laid siege to Jerusalem in the summer of 1099. The city was well defended, and the Crusaders lacked the resources for a prolonged siege in the arid landscape. Using timber from dismantled ships brought overland from the coast, they built siege towers. On July 15, 1099, after a desperate assault, the Crusaders breached the walls. What followed was one of the most infamous massacres of the Middle Ages. The Crusaders, embittered by their long and brutal journey, slaughtered the city's inhabitants, Muslims and Jews alike. It was a bloody and tragic conclusion to their pilgrimage. With Jerusalem secured, the Crusaders established 4 states in the region, known as the Crusader states: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These were European feudal kingdoms transplanted into the Middle East, constantly at war with their neighbors. Of course, the story doesn't end there. The capture of Jerusalem prompted a Muslim response, leading to the Second, Third, and many subsequent crusades over the next 200 years. We see legendary figures like Saladin and Richard the Lionheart clash in the Third Crusade, a conflict that has become the stuff of legend. We see the Fourth Crusade, which went disastrously off course and ended with the shocking sack of Christian Constantinople by the Crusaders themselves. The legacy of the Crusades is incredibly complex and still debated today. They fostered trade and an exchange of ideas between East and West, introducing new foods, technologies, and knowledge to Europe. But they also created a deep-seated legacy of religious strife and mistrust. The Crusaders' path was paved with faith and ambition, but also with immense suffering and violence. It's a stark reminder of how devotion, politics, and human nature can combine to shape the world in profound and often tragic ways. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey along the Crusaders' path. It's a vast and fascinating topic, and we've only scratched the surface. What part of this history interests you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the Middle Ages channel for more deep dives into this incredible era. We'll see you in the next one.